On May 6, 2008, Ricky Williams, 54, fished at Dismal Creek, Virginia, hoping for trout. He'd been fishing for 30 minutes with no bites. Normally, he'd enjoy fishing, but he and his dog were hungry after weeks of camping. If they didn't catch fish, they might not eat. Dismal Creek, despite its name, was a beautiful spot on the Appalachian Trail, a famous 2,200-mile trail on the East Coast. Hikers on the trail follow a code to help each other when needed. Ricky knew about the Appalachian Trail code and hoped passing hikers might offer food. As time passed, no one came, and Ricky's dog sensed danger. He heard someone approaching and felt both hopeful and uneasy. Ricky, older and frail, posed no threat, having grown weaker due to dwindling food supplies during weeks of camping. While the Appalachian Trail was generally safe, recent murders occurred nearby. Randall Lee Smith killed 2 hikers less than 2 miles from Ricky's spot. Ricky, aware of the danger, felt apprehensive as a man approached. The stranger, Scott Johnston, eased Ricky's worries. Scott shared food and fishing gear, and they fished together for hours. As they caught fish, Scott invited Ricky to join him and his friend for dinner at their campsite, a generous offer for Ricky, who had run out of food. As the sun set, Scott and Ricky walked back to Scott's campsite. Scott's fishing pole got stuck, so he told Ricky to go ahead while he freed it. When Ricky reached the clearing, he found a huge man, presumably Scott's friend, by the campfire. Startled and alone, Ricky raised his hands in defense. Just then, Scott emerged and introduced the man as Sean. Sean relaxed, but Ricky sensed tension. Scott insisted Ricky join them for dinner, but Ricky felt uneasy, especially with Sean's demeanor. Despite Scott's assurances, Ricky hesitated to sit with them by the campfire. Ricky, feeling annoyed by Scott's insistence, reluctantly sat next to Sean, who seemed unwelcoming. Scott handed the fish to Sean for preparation, and then went to his truck to blast country music, which bothered Ricky. He found the behavior disrespectful in the serene outdoors. Ricky sensed something off about the men, finding them pushy and possibly aggressive. Despite his discomfort, Ricky stayed because he and his dog were hungry and needed to eat the fish. After Scott returned from the truck, both he and Sean began deboning the fish with their knives, while Ricky watched nervously. Ricky timidly offered to help, but they waved him off. As they cooked the fish over the open flame, Ricky felt a slight shift in the mood, relieved that the men weren't handling weapons anymore. To ease his nerves, Ricky shared his love for the Appalachian Trail and how he found solace in nature, even practicing meditation and chanting. However, Ricky sensed the men found him strange, making him feel embarrassed for being open with them. Fortunately, the fish finished cooking, and they ate in silence. As they finished around 8 p.m., darkness enveloped the surroundings. Ricky, feeling uneasy, thanked Sean and Scott and quickly left with his dog toward his campsite. However, after walking about 10 or 15 feet, Ricky stopped and turned back towards the campsite. At that moment, a loud bang, akin to a small explosion, reverberated through the forest. About 30 minutes later and 4 miles away from Ricky, Sean, and Scott's campsite, 2 women dining at home heard frantic knocking at their door. In this isolated area, they feared the worst and prepared to call the police. Opening the door cautiously, they were shocked to find a man covered in blood, his hand over his bleeding neck. The man mentioned something about Dismal Creek before collapsing. The women immediately called 911 for help. The woman, stunned by the situation, noticed an idling Jeep outside her house, suggesting the man arrived in it. Moments later, ambulances and police cars arrived, swiftly taking the bleeding man away. Meanwhile, police headed to Dismal Creek after the woman mentioned it in her 911 call. As they drove up the mountain road, they encountered a speeding truck. The driver attempted to evade the police but crashed violently off the road, flipping multiple times before coming to a stop. The police officers, perplexed by the truck's erratic behavior, approached cautiously with guns drawn. Despite the crash, the driver was alive. Suspicious of his actions, especially given their route to investigate the Dismal Creek incident, they called an ambulance but also dispatched an officer to accompany it. The police suspected a potential connection between the truck crash and the injured man found at the woman's doorstep. About 30 minutes after the truck crash, the police left the scene and proceeded to Dismal Creek. Upon arrival, they searched the area thoroughly. They stumbled upon a different campsite, not related to Ricky, Sean, and Scott's camp. It appeared to belong to someone mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. Inside the tent, they found 30 Knieves, a police scanner for monitoring police activity, various piles of clothing including kids and adults, eyeglasses, 8 pairs of women's underwear, and a map of the Appalachian Trail. Inside the tent, alongside the circled spots on the Appalachian Trail map, the police found a cassette tape playing what sounded like a satanic ritual chant. However, the most disturbing discovery was a birth certificate bearing a name known throughout the area. This name tied together all the seemingly unrelated events of that night. Earlier, after Ricky walked away from Sean and Scott's campsite, there was a loud explosion. It was Ricky shooting Sean, who had touched his bleeding face in shock. As Scott ran, Ricky shot him in the neck and back, but Scott managed to escape. Ricky then shot Sean in the chest, but Sean miraculously got up, sprinted to his Jeep, and fled. Later, Sean saw Scott emerge from the woods onto the road. Sean, gravely injured, drove the Jeep to the nearest help with Scott, who appeared drenched in blood, knocking on the women's door. Both were airlifted to the hospital. The truck driver involved in the crash was Randall Lee Smith, using the alias Ricky Williams. Randall, infamous for the 1981 double homicide near Dismal Creek, had been paroled in 1996 but struggled financially after his electronic bracelet came off in 2008. He eventually moved onto the Appalachian Trail with his dog, using the name Ricky Williams. On May 6, 2008, when Sean and Scott arrived at Dismal Creek for fishing, Randall Lee Smith was waiting. The motives behind Randall's 1981 murders and his targeting of Sean and Scott in 2008 remain unknown. Randall suffered from severe mental illness and likely regarded the Appalachian Trail as sacred, his home. He may have perceived Sean and Scott as disrespecting the trail, prompting the attack. However, Sean and Scott did nothing intentionally disrespectful. They viewed Randall as a homeless drifter, feeling compassion for his situation. Sean and Scott extended kindness to Randall, aiming to restore his humanity through food and companionship, despite his smaller stature not posing a threat. Randall's campsite served as a space for him to honor nature through meditation and chants. The discovery of various items inside the tent raised concerns about additional victims, but DNA samples didn't match any known cases. Police investigations into the circled locations yielded no evidence of violent events beyond Dismal Creek. Only Randall knew the truth about the events, which will likely remain unknown since he passed away just 4 days after being taken into custody due to a blood clot resulting from the crash. During his time in custody, Randall never admitted to any additional victims. Sean still carries bullets in his head and chest, while Scott bears scars on his neck and back. Despite their injuries, both men have made a remarkable recovery and continue to frequent Dismal Creek for camping and fishing trips.